What should I do? How should I do it? How much should I eat? What exercise should I do? How should I bring up my kids? What should I do with my money? What kind of house should I build? What should I do with my garden? They're all asking for advice. They're great questions. I live in the South Island of New Zealand, and I rely a lot on the advice of farmers who have lived here a very long time, because I don't know anything about rural New Zealand, and these people were born here. So I ask advice. The interesting thing about asking advice, though, if you want to be healthy, fit and strong, have a career or business that you love, be financially free and have great people in your life, they're the things that I chat about every day. And I chat about them because they're what I research every single day. What I have found out as an old lady is that there's lots of controversial, contradicting, completely different opinions about all of those things. So how do you know what's going to work for you? And if you're going to ask advice from somebody, how do you do it respectfully? And how do you make sure that the person that you're asking advice from knows what they're talking about? And that, for me, is a very complicated situation, because when I first started as an exercise professional, if somebody was a doctor, or they had 30 years experience, or they had 1,000 people or members at their gym, or they had 200 people in their group exercise class, I just assumed that they must be experts in that particular area. Even worse, when you get into the exercise profession over many years, if somebody's got ripped abdominals or tight butt cheeks, or they look fantastic, they must be really healthy, so they must know how to get into great shape, so I'm going to listen to them. But again, if you've got 10 people who look fantastic, they've got ripped abdominals and tight butt cheeks, you might find that they have completely different opinions about how to eat and how to exercise. So how do you ask for advice? Should you ask for advice? And if somebody asks you for advice, what should you do? And now again, as a very old lady, and this is just life experience, I don't want to give anybody advice. What do I know? And even if I think I know, how do I know it's going to work for that person? So I've learnt the hard way, rather than telling people what to do, giving people advice, making broad statements about food and exercise and this is what you should do. My question is always, what do you think you should do? Because it doesn't matter what I think. What does that person want to do? What do they already believe? And this is this great question. It's a communication tool, but it will save you a lot of time, because if somebody doesn't really want your advice, and I'll use this example, sometimes people ask you a question, and I think most of the time when people ask you a question, they don't really want your answer, they just want to talk. So if somebody says, what do you have for breakfast? You might be very keen to tell them this is what I have for breakfast. But perhaps they are just wanting to tell you what they have for breakfast. I'll take it a bit broader. Rowie, have you ever been to Europe? Now, I know, because I'm an old lady and I've lived a really long time, that people don't care whether or not I've been to Europe. What's happened is that they're about to go to Europe, or they have just come back from Europe and they want to tell me about it. So I always share very openly and happily, why did you ask me the question? Which then says, I'm about to go to Europe, or I've just come back from Europe. And I always then say, tell me about that. Because the best communication tool you can ever use, whether you're giving advice, asking advice, is to find out what that person wants. And I just listened, interestingly, to a CIA agent talking on a podcast recently about why the CIA is so effective at communicating and getting information from people. It's because they genuinely are interested in that person. Now, they're interested in them for a different reason. They want to get information out of them, obviously. But the technique for doing that is superb communication technique, which if you use it with your kids, your partner, your next door neighbour, the people that you work with, it will work really effectively, which is tell me about you and tell me about that. Why did you ask me that question? And then ask 2 or 3 more questions about each answer. If you really think that people are interested in you, or you really think that people want your advice, you might be surprised that that may not be true. But even if it is true, let's find out so that you don't waste any time. So if somebody asks you for advice, or somebody asks you a question, great question, great that you want to ask me for advice, but why did you ask me the question? Why are you asking me for advice? And you might find that you don't spend very much time there, because the person then just says, well, and they start talking, which if you're interested in that person, you can listen, which is great. But it also means that you don't have to waste your time giving them advice or sharing information about you, because they're not really interested. There's an interesting side note here. If you do ask somebody for advice, I was taught this a very long time ago, don't be an ask-hole. I think it's a great expression. If you ask somebody for advice, then listen. You should have done your research first. Would that be fair? I'm only going to ask advice from people who I believe have the answer or can help me with my challenge. So if you ask your friend who's broke for advice about finances, probably a silly idea. If you ask somebody that's out of shape, overweight, unfit, weak and frail how to get healthy, fit and strong, probably not a good idea. If you ask somebody how to have a beautiful home and they live in a caravan or a tent, probably not a good idea. And I can give you 1,000 of those examples. If you are not well, if you are unhealthy, could it be a really good idea to find out for yourself before you go to an expert? People say, well, if you're sick, you go to the doctor. But find out for yourself first how your human body works so that when you go to the doctor, you can go there armed with great questions. So that when you're asking for advice, you've already got a general idea or an understanding of the thing that you're asking advice for, so that the person doesn't con you, trick you, tell you BS. You have a really good understanding of that first. So if I take my car to the mechanic, I have a pretty good understanding of how a car works first so that they can't rip me off. My father was a builder, so when I talk to a builder, I've got some pretty good questions to ask any builder to find out if they know what they're doing. I've never worked on a farm, never been on a farm, don't know anything about farming. So when I get advice about my property, 20 acres in the arse end of nowhere, I don't just get advice from one farmer. I ask lots of different farmers, but I don't ask for their advice. I'm very, very respectful. I say, you've lived here a very long time. What do you think about this? And then as an adult, I get to choose between that advice, and that advice. But an ask-hole is that you go and ask somebody for advice, and then you go and ask somebody else for advice, and then you listen to nobody, you just go and do your own thing anyway. So rather than waste people's time, could it be a really good idea to learn for yourself first? And if you really think you need some help, go to the person who can definitely help you, not somebody who you're just going to waste their time, and then ask intelligent questions that you have already researched. So it might go a bit like this. I don't know anything about what you do, but this is the research that I've done so far. What do you think? So they know that you're not just coming as an ask-hole to waste their time. I'm sharing all of this with you because as an exercise professional, I don't want to give anybody advice because people have their own opinion about how to eat and how to exercise. So the magic communication tool for that is very simple, and you can use it for any area of your life. If you were your own high-performance eating and exercise coach, what advice would you give yourself? If you were your own parenting coach, what advice would you give yourself? If you were your own financial planner, what advice would you give yourself? If you were going to build this home and I wasn't here, if you were a builder, what advice would you give yourself? And the reason I'm sharing that so passionately is there's two reasons for asking that question. People usually have an opinion, so it's good to know what their opinion is. It's good to know what they already know so that you don't give them information that they already have. But it's also very respectful, isn't it? Yes, I might have some information to share with you in this particular area, but I want to make sure that I'm going to give you what you need. So what is it that you need? And I'll use an example particularly with food when people say, what should I eat? And this is my standard answer. If you were your own high-performance eating coach, what advice would you give yourself? And there's never been one time, and I've asked that question thousands of times, where somebody has given me back the same information that I would have given them. Everybody's got an opinion about how to eat, and there's so many different diets and eating plans, and then if you go into exercise and how to exercise and what people think is right and wrong, good and bad food, right and wrong exercise, how many days, how many sets, how many reps, how much, how often, when. There's so much controversial information about eating and exercise. I really want to find out first what that person knows already before I would ever give them advice. But the beautiful thing is, as I shared, I never give advice, because when I ask that question, if you were your own eating and exercise coach, what advice would you give yourself? First of all, that's what they believe, so why would I disagree? And second, nobody's ever said to me, I think I should sit on the couch, eat chips, eat takeaway food, watch Netflix all day, be completely inactive and eat crappy food, and I think that'll make me healthy, fit and strong. Of course, nobody ever says that. Most people have a very good idea of what they need to do to get healthy, fit and strong. So then all you have to share is, well, that's a great idea. How are you going to hold yourself accountable to the advice that you've given yourself? And this is where it's a really important question. Is it more likely that if somebody gives them self-advice, that they're more likely to believe themselves than if you give them a whole heap of stuff that you might tell them to eat something they don't like. You might give them an exercise to do that they don't want to do. Find out what people want, what they believe, what their opinion is, so that if you are going to give advice, and that's completely up to you, and I would never tell you not to give advice because that would be giving advice. My personal experience, I don't ever give advice. I never tell people what to do. All I want to do is find out what's going to work for them, and usually they can tell me that. So wrap that all up. Do you want to be healthy, fit and strong? Do you want to have a career or business that you love? Do you want to be financially free? Do you want to have great people in your life if you haven't already? Could it be a really good idea to analyse, study, research and train in all of those areas yourself before you ask anybody for advice? Because if you ask for advice without being educated in those areas, is it possible that people will give you rubbish? They'll give you stuff that won't work. They'll give you stuff that you don't want to do. And if you're going to ask advice, let's not waste people's time. Let's only go there because we've done everything we possibly can on our own. So that's my little puppy dog sitting at my feet, little Judo. One of the beautiful things about having a dog is this unconditional love. And that's one of the things I want to share as a human being. If you really care about humans, if you really care about people, could it be a good idea not to waste their time? Don't ask for advice if you don't want their advice. Don't go and talk to people if they can't help you, because what a waste of time, your time and their time. If you want to live your life to the max, work it out for yourself. Become a responsible person. Responsible. I'm able to respond because I've studied how my human body works. I've studied how to have a career or business that I love. I've studied how to have financial freedom, and I've studied great relationships, because that's how I want to live my life to the max, and I want to make sure that I've got all the information that I need. Could that be a great way to live your life to the max? What do you reckon, Judo? Woohoo! Live your life to the max.